First, Byron Donald, thank you very much. It's great to have you in town. Thank you for stopping by the show. It's always good to talk to you. Now, let's just start off macro.
Yeah.
What is the main sticking point to doing anything on the, let's just stick with school shootings for a second, dealing with the people who are in mental distress, giving families an ability to do something about it, what that means in terms of weapons, large capacity magazines? Is anything on the table as we speak?
Well, first, let me talk to actually the mental health aspects, because honestly, I believe if you look at the last 10 years of mass shootings, whether you're talking about in schools or whatever the situation is, every one of them dealt with a gunman who had serious mental health issues. The family knew about it. Mm-hmm. The neighbors were concerned. There was somebody in the orbit who was like, oh, wait a minute, this could be a potential problem. So if you look at them virtually all, that's what is the consistent factor. So I think if you're going to talk about states and the federal government getting into investments in mental health, things to talk about ways to identify, help people get the help that they need, I think that one has real legs on both sides of the aisle, frankly. The issue is a lot about what you said. It's become this choice of we're going to go down the line of an assault weapons ban or universal background checks or whatever else you're saying. And in my party, in the Republican Party, like, we're not saying no. We're not banning assault rifles, quote unquote. We're not banning rifles. Universal background checks pretty much exist today, except if I chose to sell my gun to you. But if we did it at if I went and bought a gun at a gun show, and I've bought 2 guns at a gun show, I go through a background check. If you go to any arms deal, any federally licensed firearms dealer, you go through a background check. It's just private party sales. Private party sales really aren't that much a percentage of overall gun sales in the United States. So I think it's the dogmatic pieces of the gun debate, which stops stuff like actual mental health, not just screenings, but providing the access to resources for people who, frankly, are falling through the cracks.
So I'm hearing you're preaching to the converted when it comes to taking all health seriously and providing resources where needed. But now you're dealing with a special category of people who need help, who may have access to weapons. Maybe they got them legally, because unless you're adjudicated mentally ill, which happens very rarely, they don't know. Nobody even asks you why you want a weapon right now, right? If I come in and I say, I need a gun today, some states have 72-hour, 48-hour, some as long as a week waiting period, depending on what you want. But what about a real red flag law, or order of protection, as the Tennessee governor's calling it? Because I think red flag has gotten a little stigmatized. Are you open to giving the ability of a family member to call and say, listen, I love Chris. He is not right. He's talking crazy, and he has weapons, and allowing authorities to take them until there's a finding that that person's not a danger to themselves or somebody else?
Well, no, I think you hit on the issue with red flag laws, risk protection orders. It's something that was done in Florida when I was in the legislature. To be transparent, I did not support the risk protection orders in Florida. Here's why, because of what you just said. A family member, somebody says there's an issue over here. Then the law enforcement comes and they take the legal property of the person, and now they have to go to court to get their property back. I think that situation is reverse. If somebody's going to bring a claim of real serious mental health issues, making the claim is one thing. That person having to go through whatever that process is another. But if you take their property from them, and then it's found out that that wasn't the case, now you have a taking, which is, you have a taking of somebody's property. That is unconstitutional. They have to go prove their innocence to reclaim their property. That's a serious issue for people on the right side of politics, or however you want to say it.
But are you neglecting?
At the end of the day, it is still their property.
But you're neglecting the emergent aspect of the situation. For instance, you could get me put into a hospital for, depending on the state, 48, 96 hours, and then because, there's a finding that I'm a danger to myself or others because of something I'm doing or saying, and then I can go to court and I can get out. We allow it there. Why wouldn't you allow the same in extremis situation when it comes to weapons?
Well, actually, I think you're making a key point. I know in Florida and in other states as well, you can actually make a call and a determination for somebody in Florida. We call it Baker acting. Mm-hmm. Where somebody is Baker acted. They have to go through a psychological evaluation. Yeah. They're held for 72 hours, so on and so forth. It's not a great process. I've toured these facilities. But if you're in those extreme situations, those remote situations, which is really what we're talking about here, there's a pathway to adjudicate and understand the mental health of somebody. There's a difference between doing that and then preemptively taking their property. And I think if you could figure out that apparatus, that framework, whatever the guideposts are, I think you can get something. You can get somewhere actually to be able to actually assess the mental health issues while also protecting the rights of the individual. Because understand, there are millions of people in our country, unfortunately, who are dealing with mental health issues.
Yep.
That also doesn't mean they're going to commit violence.
No, statistically, they are less likely
100%,
to commit violence than people who are not mentally ill.
So that's why protecting their rights is important in this entire equation as well.
But I'm saying that if we're trying to find ways to figure it out, as you said, the premise is somebody always knew something, Congressman.
Yeah.
And it's not the first wave. I know that people came out in the Louisville one, but I have covered dozens of these, and they say, who's the nicest guy in the world? I would never suspect it. I know, that's why you're on TV, because you're not racked with guilt about this person who you loved or knew, and you were probably powerless to do anything about it. My question is just about pushing a line. Of course, you don't want a wrongful taking. Equity abhors a forfeiture. It's one of the oldest edicts in the law. Right. But you do have you do have conditions upon which you can do it. It leads me to a side-by-side comparison. Sure. You see what Massachusetts is doing, okay? Which is basically they treat every gun transaction as if it were a carry permit transaction. You need a license, basically, like driving a car. And you pay a nominal fee, you get the license, they print you, they background check you, they ask you why you want it, they make a phone call. Their numbers have come down, they're one of the lowest in the nation. You compare them to, let's say, a Mississippi, which has taken an opposite approach, right? Where it is way harder to vote in Mississippi than it is to buy a weapon, and both of them are based on the same policy, which is, well, we want to be safe. We want to make sure that the person who wants to vote is the real person. You know, we have a checklist up for people on the situation. There were Massachusetts versus Mississippi in getting a weapon, and now Mississippi in terms of to vote and versus getting a gun. That doesn't seem a little perverse to you, that it's that much more scrutinizing to vote than it is to get a weapon?
Well, I mean, look, I didn't see Massachusetts voting parameters. I'm assuming you just don't get to.
Well, they don't have voter ID and all that stuff.
Well, that's another discussion for
right.
Me. Let's talk to gun purchases. I think that if you're going to talk about what the various states want to do, that's a matter really of politics and what the legislature can pass. I don't agree with Massachusetts' protocol, but the voters of Massachusetts have supported their legislature to do so. I view that as being an infringement of the ability to bear arms. That's how I view it. In Florida,
all right, but let's talk about why.
But in Florida, because, again, your ability to possess firearms is one of the bedrock principles of the founding document of this country. We may not like, and trust me, when we see these tragedies, nobody likes the outcomes of these tragedies. But the tragedies are not indicative of what is the normal state of gun ownership in the United States, which is you have millions of legal gun owners, millions upon millions, hundreds of millions of Americans own firearms, and they do it peacefully. They respect their neighbors. They're not causing harm.
But then why do we have more gun violence and gun death than anywhere else in the world?
Well, again, we have a lot of guns in our country.
Right.
I'm not saying gun violence is a virtue. I'm not saying it's good. But if you compare the number of incidents compared to the overall population, I mean, come on, Chris, the statistics are there for everybody to see. And in the ones that we're talking about, the mass shootings, the things that we see on TV, schools or what happened in that bank in Louisville the other morning, that stuff, I mean, we're talking about 8 to 10 of those incidents a year compared to the hundreds of millions of Americans that own firearms.
True. The numbers are higher than that, but they're a very small percentage of overall gun crime. You're going to have, upwards of 500, 600 mass shootings. You're going to have 100 or so, depending on the year, of what you have with school shootings. They're a small percentage of overall gun crime. But I do think there's an issue here with the logic. You have a lot of guns. Okay, we've made that decision. I don't think the genie goes back in the bottle.
No.
But you can reduce the potential harm of weapons by taking who has them more seriously and by thinking about what you get and why you get it. Large capacity magazines. You and I have no reason for large capacity magazines. You're not using them to hunt. If you want to burn through ammo fast at the range, you can, great. You could leave it at the range. People do that. There's only one good reason to have them, and it's to fire as many bullets as quickly as you can with a semi-automatic weapon. And we have seen that when you reduce them, you have fewer deaths. Even though we don't love to track this stuff, mass shootings, the deaths in mass shootings have skyrocketed as LCMs have become more available. Shouldn't you be open to thinking, well, what do I need those for? Well, why do we need those? You want the weapon, you have the weapon. But why do you have to have the ability to fire as much ammunition as you can and change as quickly as possible?
Well, first thing is, if you're going to talk about large capacity magazines, the key thing is that we got to study that more. Because are they more available? Yes, you could say they're more available. Do
and
we
more
have
people
more
are dying.
Gun crimes in our country? Yeah, but there's a bunch of reasons why that does exist. We already talked about one, mental health. Two, if you want to look at the most gun deaths in the United States, most of them occur in urban cities, like right here in New York.
Mass shootings.
Is that a fact? Mass shootings, 2 or more, if that's the definition we're going to go by. Is that because of the large capacity magazine, or is that because of the way?
Handguns.
Hold on. Because you could have those in handguns too.
Yeah.
Or are we going to talk about the fact of what's the status of the criminal justice system in those jurisdictions? Mm-hmm. Are those crimes and other crimes taken as seriously as they are in other jurisdictions, or less seriously?
But they play the same problem.
I think there's a lot of things that you got to look in that if you're going to make that determination from a legislative standpoint. And here's the point I want to make: if we're going to legislate something nationwide, okay, then it can't be a knee-jerk reaction by members of Congress just looking at the news. As much as the tragedy exists, as much as it pains us all, you have to steadily look at the data and then make a data-driven decision. Because if you make a data-driven decision, now you actually have something that can stand the test of time, that people can actually respect.
I'm with you. I don't know of a data point that doesn't make this case. You know, you have more of everything bad that you would ever want. You have more weapons being sold. Every time one of these things happens, people go out and buy weapons because they think there's going to be, this ban, which I think is really a boogeyman, to be interested. I don't think it's ever going to happen. But it works politically. I don't know what metric you could point to that shouldn't scare you. You have more suicides. You have more kids dying. You have more people killing each other. You have more people getting weapons in different ways than they haven't had. You have more weapons. I mean, isn't it obvious that we need to do a lot more than we're doing right now?
Well, I think there's a number of things. One, that's why we talked about mental health first, top of the order.
But they're not all crazy.
It's not all that. Number two is you do have to figure out a couple other things. One, the culture around criminal justice. How are we treating crime? Are we taking it seriously? Number three, and this is a big one, young kids and just people in general as they move through our society. Are they feeling fulfilled? Are they actually getting the best out of life? Are they following their pursuits, their interests, their dreams? Is our economy shrinking their opportunities and what their personal franchise is going to look like going forward? Crime is driven by a lot of things. A lot of it's driven by desperation. I remember my pastor a long time ago, he said, people typically are about 10 seconds away to 15 seconds away from stupid. But when you're desperate, you're 3 seconds away. Mm. And so all these different factors add into it. It's not just the actual tool. It's also what's going on in society around us.
I think it should all be on the table. Because, look, you have to be right. 50x%, depends on the year and how you want to measure it, is suicide. That is the ultimate act of desperation.
Yes.
And you have a handgun, it becomes manyfold more likely that you're going to do it because the access makes it so easy. But I wonder what it will take for all of it to be on the table. Let's just talk about all of it, and let's try to do everything that we can. Red flag laws, resources for families, for people who are in distress, how we reward states for having their numbers come down based on what their laws are on access, because people can do it. New York did it. You can criticize New York for a lot of things, but they brought down their gun violence numbers. Why? Well, because they just took it more seriously who they're giving access to. Massachusetts did the same thing. You see in California, they're doing it with ammunition registration, because a lot of people go and buy ammunition. They don't have gun licenses. That's a red flag, of a different kind. I just wonder, do you think it's just still too much of a political boogeyman, we'll leave it on this, that you can't even talk about it?
In part, yeah. I think if you're going to be dogmatic about the conversation, then both sides are just going to retreat to their side. And it's an unfortunate reality of politics, because that's not even politics, that's just people. Mm-hmm. If you're not going to at least acknowledge my side of an argument, then why am I going to deal with yours? Mm-hmm. I will tell you, on camera, live, this is the most in-depth and actually thoughtful conversation on this topic I've ever had. Because typically it dog ears back to the dogma. I want to ban assault weapons. I want to protect the Second Amendment, which, obviously is the United States Constitution. So protecting the Constitution is my job. But that being said, everybody retreats to their side of the argument. If you're going to do this, you got to have a data-driven argument. You have to have a thoughtful argument. And you have to acknowledge the merits on both sides of the situation. And I think if you can get to that politically, you can actually get somewhere.
Congressman, I appreciate you doing it. You're always welcome to have the conversation. I wish you good luck on your job, all right? God bless the family. Thank you for taking the time.